before we were left off yesterday, and we were talking about i's. What do you mean I?
Imaginary unit. It is.
Okay. Imaginary number, imaginary unit. What's the value of I?
-1. I squared.
1.
Square root of -1.
Okay, so I, just plain old I itself, is the square root of -1. But then what is I squared?
-1.
-1, right? So that goes back to the beginning notes here that I is just the square root of -1. So anytime we have a negative under the square root, it can be separated out as an I. When you square it, I squared is a value of -1. And that's what we're dealing with in some of these other problems, that when we see an I squared in it, we have to turn it into a -1. Okay, so we had simplified square roots, we had added and subtracted, which was just like terms, right? We had multiplied, which was like distributive property and FOILing. And then, am I at the correct spot in the notes for your class?
Yeah.
Okay, we've done this one division example, right? Okay, so with dividing, remember, we can't really divide as is. So we are multiplying by the conjugate of the denominator. So we multiply by the conjugate of the denominator there. That would help us to simplify this problem. So let's look at B. Okay? Again, we can't really divide this as is. It's not, an easy division problem that we can do or anything. So, remember the rule is to multiply top and bottom of the fraction by the conjugate of the denominator. What do I need to multiply by?
-1 plus 2i.
It's currently -1 plus 2i. What is the conjugate change in that?
-1 minus 2i.
Okay, it changes just the middle sign basically, or just the sign in front of the imaginary part. So if it's -1 plus 2i, our conjugate is going to be -1 minus 2i. What I do to the denominator? We do to the numerator. So we're going to be multiplying top and bottom by -1 minus 2i. Okay? So, how do we multiply the tops? What's the magic word there? We got to FOIL, yes? Okay, so as we FOIL, 4 times -1, -4. 4 times -2i, minus 8i. Then, -3i times -1. -3i times -1 is plus 3i. And what about -3i times -2i? 6i squared. Okay, FOIL your denominator as well. Once you kind of learn what cancels, you might be able to do some shortcuts. Don't do it though if you're not there. Okay, a lot of us probably aren't there yet. So first, -1 times -1, 1. Outside, -1 times -2i, plus 2i. Inside, 2i times -1, minus 2i. And last, 2i times -2i, minus 4i squared. Okay, now, job is some cleanup here. And I'll write out whatever steps we need to here, but let's start with, what do we know about I squareds? Okay, so I squareds, if you recall from yesterday, are equivalent to -1s. So this I squared becomes -1. This I squared becomes -1. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write out, just because I want to make sure that we don't lose anybody. So if we change those I squareds to -1, and I'll do like terms next time, I have -4 minus 8i not sure what just happened there. Minus 8i plus 3i. Okay, 6i squared. What does that become?
6
minus,
-1.
okay, so yeah, it's 6 times -1, which is minus 6, right? Okay, denominator. It's 1 plus 2i minus 2i. What about minus 4i squared? Yeah, minus 4 times -1, which is plus 4. Now, some of you may have done some cleanup already. Awesome. If not, here we go, right? On top, what can I clean up?
8i and 3i.
Okay, 8i and 3i. Minus 8i plus 3i is going to be minus 5i. What else can I clean up?
You can put -6.
Yeah, like terms. -4 minus 6 is -10. Okay, what about the denominator? Okay, and in your denominator, if you've done this correctly, your i's should cancel, right? The middle terms should cancel. So 2 i's are gone, and we're left with 1 plus 4, which is 5. Okay. Can I go farther?
Yeah.
Yes? I can go farther because,
I could go to all of them.
yeah, they all divide by 5, or the denominator of 5 divides into both terms. Okay, that's what I would think, that it divides into here and it divides into there. So, what is -10 divided by 5? -2 minus 5i divided by 5.
-1 minus 1. So just cancel out.
Minus 1i.
I.
Or how I'm going to write it is a minus I. So 5 divided by 5, or 5i divided by 5. The 5's do cancel, and it's 1i, or just I. So I wrote mine as minus I. Now remember, you can only do that division if it works in all the terms. Okay, questions there? Okay, think you know what you're doing on the next one then?
Yeah.
We have 5 minus 2i divided by 3 plus 4i. You know your first step? Okay, good. I like it. She says multiply both by 3 minus 4i because that is the conjugate of the denominator. Now, kind of like the last one. There we go, kind of. Kind of like the last one, we're going to have to FOIL top and bottom, yes? So we're getting some good foiling practice in. So on top, some of you are ahead of me. Good deal. Check with me every so often. If you're with me, first, 5 times 3 is 15. Outside, so distribute the 5 again. 5 times -4i minus 20i. Insides, now I'm distributing the -2. -2i times 3 minus 6i. And last, -2i times -4i. Plus 8i squared. Okay, denominator. If you can think like this and you know, okay, first and last are there, they're conjugates, my outsides and insides are going to cancel, you can drop those off. But make sure you know what you're doing. Okay? You're going to see me at this level, I keep putting them in there because I don't want us making careless mistakes. So, first, 3 times 3 is 9. Outsides, 3 times -4i minus 12i. Outsides, or excuse me, that was outsides. Insides, 4i times 3 plus 12i. And last, 4i times -4i negative 16i squared. Okay. I squareds. What do we know about I squareds?
They,
They become negative ones, yes? So that becomes a negative 1. That guy becomes a negative 1. So if I just rewrite that, 15 minus 20i minus 6i plus 8i squared. Negative 8, because it's 8 times negative 1, right? Denominator, 9 minus 12i plus 12i. What about minus 16i squared?
plus 16.
Becomes plus 16, right? Because it's minus 16 times negative 1, and that becomes plus 16. Good. Okay. Clean up. What can we put together on top?
The i's and the should be like 7 and negative 26.
Okay. So our constants are just plain old numbers. 15 minus 8 is 7. Negative 20i minus 6i is minus 26i. In the denominator?
It just be 25.
Yeah. Minus 12i plus 12i cancels. 9 plus 16 is 25. Okay. Am I done?
Maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Can they simplify?
No.
25 doesn't divide with 7, it doesn't divide with 26. There's not anything in common in all three of those. So in terms of simplifying, we're done. Now, if you recall, and I guess the directions on the front side, not here, but they're expecting our answers in A plus BI form. I'll be honest. I can handle this. I need to look up and see what Savas says. Okay, but if they say A plus BI form, one thing you might have to do is separate this into two fractions. Because that denominator of 25 goes with both the numerators. Okay, it splits into both. So this can be rewritten as 7/25 minus 26i over 25. Thought I was going to make it. There we go. Okay. I'm not totally opposed to the answer up above, but officially, when they start talking about express your answers in A plus BI form, if I leave it as one fraction, I don't technically have that. So here, if I split it, I have A and I have my B part. Okay? So just kind of be aware of that, depending on what Savas asks. So if you get, sometimes you get statements from Savas that says, although your answer is equivalent to the correct answer, it's not in the proper form. Basically, you get that at times, right? So, okay, questions there? Okay. We have one more in this section. Thoughts on 9 plus 12i, all divided by 3i?
The conjugate be just negative 3.
You could look at it like that. Are you guys with them? Because think about it. If that is 0 plus 3i, does that make sense? What would the conjugate of 0 plus 3i be?
Minus 3.
0 minus 3i. Could we use that? Yeah, and you could just use the minus 3i. Now, to be honest, you could also just use a regular 3i. You could also just use I here. Okay? There's a variety of different ways you can do this. I'm not opposed to using negative 3i because it's what you guys see and makes sense to you. It just means we have a little more reducing at the end. But our job is to just get rid of the I, yes? When there's two terms, you have to use the conjugate to make that happen. With just one term and just a single I, you could just multiply by I, make this 3i squared, and then 3i squared can become negative 3. Okay, so that is an option.
If you wanted to, could you just reduce it right now? Is that what you're trying to say? Because they're all.
You could divide them all by 3 right now, yes, but then you'd still have to multiply by I in the end. Okay, but yes, that is, because they all divide by 3, could I reduce them before I start going? You could. You're just still having the I in the denominator. Okay, so I think, would it be best if I just multiply by negative 3i? Since that goes with the other pieces. Now, multiplying by negative 3i. Am I foiling? No, because it's just negative 3i. So even though it's out back, we're going to take that negative 3i and distribute. 9 times negative 3i.
Minus 27.
Minus 27i. 12i times negative 3i.
Minus 36 squared.
He's going to forget that squared, guys. But I'm not sitting beside him in homework to remind him. Okay. Denominator. What is 3i times negative 3i?
Minus 9i squared.
Minus 9i squared. Okay. Let's deal with the I squareds first. What do we know about I squareds?
They equal negative 1.
They equal negative 1. So, I'm going to rewrite this. Negative 27i.
Plus
What about minus 36i squared?
Plus 36.
Yeah, minus 36 times negative 1 is going to be plus 36. Negative 9i squared.
Positive 9.
Negative 9 times negative 1 is going to be positive 9. Okay. Am I done?
No.
No. What happens here?
you get the y.
Yeah. Everybody divides by 9, doesn't it? Okay. So, it's the idea of thinking, if you want, negative 27i divided by 9 plus 36 divided by 9. You can think of it like that. I haven't written the others like that, but that's a way to think about it. Okay. Clean it up. Negative 27i divided by 9. Negative 3i plus, what's 36 divided by 9? Plus 4. Now, I think Savas would take it like this, but to be official, how am I going to write my answer?
4 plus negative 3. Well,
4 minus 3i.
4 plus negative 3i is equivalent. I don't think Savas would like the plus negative, but yeah, I would just say 4 minus 3i. Okay? And lots of different, you guys know, lots of different ways to think about this in between, right? Okay. Next piece. Okay. One last piece here. And that's solving equations. I'm trying to think if we've solved equations like this year or not. My mind's kind of blanking on it right now. But how can you use square roots to solve each equation? That's kind of your hint. If this is x squared equals negative 16, if that x squared is by itself, what's our step to solve?
Take the square root of each side.
Take the square root. Okay, now, if we take the square root of the left, you take the square root of the right. What's the square root of x squared?
X.
X. Now, we're going to have to do the square root of negative 16, yes? I'm going to do that in the next step. What do I have to think about here when I take the square root in an equation setting? What do I have to put in front of that square root sign?
Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. Okay, so this is going to be plus or minus whatever the square root of negative 16 is. Now, we did this yesterday. Yes? And what do you know about the square root of negative 16?
No real solution. No.
What can we take negative 16 and break it into to help us see the pieces?
4 and 4.
Well, 16 has a perfect square, yes?
Yeah. Well,
What's the other piece that we don't have that we need to separate out? The negative. If you guys go back to the first section yesterday, we were just, and here's the deal. Do I even have to separate this out? Can I just say, what's the square root of negative 16, and you guys give me an answer? Yeah, that's very possible, especially at this point. But here's if you're struggling like, I don't know, then here's what I'm going to show you, okay? Because it's plus or minus, what's the square root of negative 1?
plus or minus 1. Or
What's
is
this
it-
lesson about? What's the square root of negative 1? I. What's the square root of 16?
4.
4. So what's the square root of negative 16?
4.
4i.
I can do this.
Are we having a moment, folks? What's the square root of negative 1? I. Okay, we've got to know that. So, questions here. That one was supposed to go a little smoother. Hopefully the next one will go a little smoother. Now, B. 4x squared equals negative 36. What's different about this one?
No 4.
Okay, the x squared is not by itself yet. So, how do we make the x squared by itself?
Divide both sides by 4.
Good. We're going to divide by 4 to get us started. So now, when I divide by 4, I have x squared equals negative 9. If you have x squared equals a number, how do we solve?
Divide both sides. I mean, take the square root.
Square root both sides. What is the square root of x squared? X. What about the square root of negative 9?
Do negative 1 times square, or x squared and negative 1 times 9.
Can we think about is the square root of negative 1 times 9? We know the square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 9 is 3. What has no one said that I've heard?
Plus minus.
Plus or minus. Anytime you take the square root in an equation setting, which is what we're doing here, you have to account for both the positive and the negative option. Okay? Getting it? Okay. Let's try C. X squared plus 75 equals 0. What's different about C?
Equals 0.
Okay, it equals 0. Do we want it to equal 0? No, we want the x squared to be
By itself.
by itself. How do I make it by itself?
You subtract off 75.
Good. See, these are skills you guys have done before. So we subtract it over. I'm going to have x squared equals negative 75. Once x squared is by itself, we're going to
Equals to 3.
take the square root. Square root of x squared is x. Square root of negative 75.
Plus or minus negative 1.
Okay, so she got the plus or minus. She separated out the negative 1. Now, 75.
Doesn't have a perfect square.
It is not a perfect square.
Yeah.
Okay, 75 is not a perfect square, which means maybe it's a situation where you just leave it as the square root of 75. However, What's in 75?
Five.
7 and 5. Oh wait, that's not what you know that. Wait, hang on.
You've got 75 cents in your pocket. What might you have?
4 quarters.
Three
3
quarters.
quarters.
3 quarters?
$4. I don't know money very well. Don't know.
Why am I asking about 3 quarters?
25 and 3.
25 and 3, and 25 is a perfect square. Remember doing this yesterday?
Yep.
If there's a perfect square, if it's not a perfect square, but there's one in it, we have to separate that out. So, we have plus or minus. Square root of negative 1 is going to be I. The square root of 25 is going to be 5. And the square root of 3 is going to be square root of 3. So put that all together as a final answer, and I have plus or minus 5i times the square root of 3. Okay. Are we good with C? Okay. So, D, what kind of steps do we have to start off doing?
Divide 9 for
Yeah. Our job is to get x squared by itself. What do we need to do first? It's 9 times x squared plus 25. I wouldn't divide by 9. I would start off subtracting the 25 first. It's going to make life a little easier that way. So, 9x squared equals negative 25. Is x squared by itself? No, so now what? Divide by 9. So now I have x squared equals, does that divide? Doesn't, does it? So I'm going to leave it as 25/9. It's good, it's good. What's my next step? If it's x squared equals a number, my job is to take the square root. I know it's a fraction, folks, but look at the pieces. It's good. They both have perfect squares, exactly. Okay? So, when we look at this, first of all, we need to say, don't forget, plus or minus. And then we're going to have the square root. What are the pieces? Actually, do I want to do it that way? Yeah, we're going to break it into pieces this way. What are the pieces? What do you know about negative 25? If you break that negative 1 off, it's negative 1 times positive 25, right? And then on the bottom, you have square root of 9. Just think about this as all individual square roots. They're all multiplying and dividing, so we can pull them apart like that. Do we know all those square roots?
Yeah.
Yeah, you should. So, plus or minus, what's the square root of negative 1? I. What's the square root of 25? So on top we have 5i. What's the square root of 9? 3. Plus or minus 5i over 3. Or that could also be written as plus or minus 5/3 I with the I after it. Just in case Savas throws a fit about the I being in the numerator. I think Savas will be okay with the I beside it or the numerator, but I don't remember. Okay? Okay, guys. You have a little over 10 minutes to be diving into the homework. Okay? Lesson 2-4 in Savas, and it's due tomorrow, which is Friday.